Welcome and thank you everyone for being here this evening and making your way through the rain. Let me start with some thanks to Carl and Cecilia from Spirimus down the back. Carl is responsible for turning a rambling Microsoft Word document into the beautiful book you can see and hopefully take home with you. So thank you, Carl. That's super. And thank you all to the Mezzana team for being here. So why did I write this book and who did I write it for? Well, I wrote it for people like you. I wrote it for the sort of people I've been working with now for 30 years. And I tried to write it in a way that expressed the way I talk and work with people. And some of the nicest feedback I've had is when someone said, look, it sounds like you're talking to me. You're in my ear when I was reading the book. So that's terrific. So the audience is people like you. And why did I write it? Well, there's two reasons. First of all, pragmatically, I got sick of sending people HBR articles and little bits and pieces about stuff that we'd been talking about. And I wanted to create one resource guide that brought together all the stuff I'd either learnt about or been shared with or created myself that was the useful, practical stuff that I found myself talking about time and time again when I was working with individuals or with teams. So it's a resource. Here you go. It's in chapter 3. I actually did that today. It's fantastic. I was working with a client today and we were talking about something. He said, can you send me more about that? And I said, it's chapter 4. Here you go. Job done. But as I worked on the book, I came to realise that there was a bigger reason for this book. Because I started to ask myself, why is it that for 30 years now I've worked with many smart, well-meaning, well-intended, intelligent people, and yet they're suffering, and yet they're miserable, yet the organisations they work with don't work well. And I started to sort of ask some big questions about, well, why is this? And I came to see that we're all working in a system, in a political, social system, that drives us to do more, that drives us to do faster and cheaper. Yeah? That's the tenets of the capitalist world we all live in. It's based on some assumptions that we can grow infinitely, the companies can grow, but we live on a finite planet. It leads us to see that people are resources rather than people. Yeah? I know there's probably some human resources directors in the room, so maybe chief people officers now. It leads us to see that the natural world is somehow separate from us. And it leads us to see that the natural world only has value if we can dig it up or cut it down or sell it. And it overemphasises the role of individuals and individual needs, and it ignores the fact that as human beings we are social animals. And as human beings we wouldn't have survived for the last 50,000 years if we hadn't been able to collaborate and cooperate and support one another. Yeah? And yet the system we work in assumes that individuals and their needs and that they are the priority. So at best, I think we all live and work in a system that can drive enormous innovation and creativity. It's done some good. Yeah? The system we work in has done some good. But it's created great wealth for a few, but it also leads us to work in situations too often where the situation of a workplace is threatening. And it damages the society and the planet that we all live in. Now, I don't have a magic wand for any of this. I'm a psychologist, I'm not a politician. And it's interesting to be talking about this given that some politicians are going to be saying an awful lot in the next few weeks. But where I've come to with this, from my perspective as a psychologist, is that each of us, and particularly leaders, particularly if we work in leadership and we influence other people, and we might have influence over an organisation, I think we have a responsibility to acknowledge the system in which we work in and to take some responsibility for ourselves as individuals about what we do about that. And if we can be the best that we can be as individuals, we can start to shift the system all around us. That's my hope. That's my belief. And I put that out there as a real level of responsibility and challenge to leaders. Are you willing to accept that? Do you want to work with that? Do you want to do some work? Because I think if we start to do that, we can start to create the conditions for healthy high performance. We can start to create conditions which already exist. I mean, some places are already doing this. I don't want to paint too black a picture here. There are people who are already doing this, where people can thrive and achieve great results. They don't have to be exclusive. We can do both. We can create conditions where people can think clearly, where they can manage their energy and they can do great work. We can create conditions where teams can collaborate and innovate and excel. And we can support our people to learn and perform. But this requires that leaders do stuff. They've got to pay attention to growth and learning as well as outcomes and profit. They've got to create the conditions for people to connect as human beings and form healthy relationships with one another. And we've got to try to do work that's meaningful, work that matters, or find a meaning for that work so that it has a purpose beyond making money. Making money is fine, but there's got to be more to it than that. So how do we get there? And that's where my book comes in. The first 3 chapters are designed to be a practical guide. And they're all about self-awareness because, as I said, I think the journey starts within each one of us. So chapter 1 is about what makes us tick. Who we are, what drives us. That's what psychologists call personality and motivation. Who are you and what do you want? Now, our personality stays with us through our life. We don't fundamentally change. But what we want and how we find meaning and how we drive ourselves can change, and that does evolve through life. So we need to know the difference. We need to know what are the aspects in which they're going to be consistent and what are the aspects which we can change. Because if we start to try and change the stuff that's consistent, that's a real hard mission. And if we ignore the stuff we can change, we're missing a trick. Chapter 2, I talk about worldviews. The fancy name for this is adult developmental constructivist theory, which is a terrible mouthful. I don't even forget that. But this is an aspect of human development psychology, which for me, when I learned about this back in 2001, so I've been working this now for more than 20 years, it was like opening up a magic box of tricks. It opened up insights into how people work and don't work together in ways that are really profound and powerful. So I'm wanting to, and again, this is one of those things where I couldn't find a single simple chapter that described it in simple language. So I've tried to summarise that. Here it is, layman's terms, this is what it's about. Then the third chapter is about change. And in particular, I pick up on the idea of the 1% change. And many of you know I've worked in high performance sport, and we know that a difference of 1% is often enough to go from 4th place to being on the medal table. So we don't have to make big changes, but we need to make the right changes. And we need to find out where they are and work at them and build new habits for change. And I'm really thirsty, I need my drink of water. So the middle section explains what we call the art of performance. This is a principle I've been developing for several years now, and William's been particularly influential in that. And that means looking at how we act, relate, and think. Each of these are important, and as leaders, as performers, we need to be able to blend how we act, relate, and think to be at our best. So this section is all about really practical tools, practical things you can do to improve those capacities. Thinking is important because in the modern world, in this world of always having more, always having to be fast, always having to be cheaper, that creates stress and it leads to our thinking becoming fixed. Yeah? We narrow it down, we get into tunnel vision, we forget about being creative, we forget about possibilities. We can become more and more prone to shortcuts and biases in how we think. They're the conditions we're in. So we've got to be aware of those conditions and do something active about them so that our thinking stays creative and stays open. The world of work, in terms of relationships, it all too often means that we start to see other people in one of 2 categories. We start to see people at work as either being a resource we can use or a barrier to me getting what I want. And we fall into this habit and we just see people as either, can you help me, or you're a barrier. And we forget that they're human beings. We forget that they have their own needs, their own hopes. They're human beings at work, just like we are. So if we're going to build healthy relationships at work, we need to understand that we all have human needs for acceptance, for control, for security, for growth. And if we can create the conditions for that, we'll have good relationships where we can be direct. It's not about being nice to everyone, but it's about being direct and dealing with human beings and respecting and being respectful mutually. Then the final stage is about acting. And again, if we think about the system that we're in, it drives us in a stress state to 2 things. We either fire ourselves at work and burn out. And I've talked to clients who say, I was up till 2 o'clock last night finishing my emails. Yeah? Who's done that? You recognise that? Throwing yourself at it, just do it and do it and do it. That's not sustainable. Or if we avoid it, we procrastinate. We deal with it's too much. Neither of those are healthy. So if we're going to be effective, we need to learn how to make different choices about what's important and how we choose to respond and prioritise what's important. So think, relate and act. And as I said, those middle chapters give you lots of practical tools and skills and ideas. And it's all stuff that works. There is nothing in there that I haven't used with clients or with myself. Yeah. Then we talk about teams. And I'm really grateful for the work I've done with Catherine and William to develop our model of exceptional teams. And I share that, explain how that works, about how it's important to build a team with a clear purpose that understands its context and what it takes to build the right habits within a team to be successful. And then there's a chapter on leadership. I came across this quote by a guy called H.L. Mencken. Don't look him up because he's actually a slightly unsavoury character, if you ever know. But he said something really profound. And he said, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple and wrong. And I love that. And I expect that over the next 6 weeks, we're going to hear lots of clear, simple answers from politicians that are probably wrong, but they might be appealing. So for me, the challenge we've got now is to move beyond the idea that any one leader knows it all, or that any one leader can be the hero that takes the organisation over the hill. We're past that, if ever we were in it, but we're past it now. And instead we need to build collaborative leadership. We need to build different talents in a leadership team to deal with the complexity that we're working with. And I've talked about 4 different archetypes of leadership. There's the coach archetype who looks after people and their development. There's the explorer that moves things forward, that takes the team with them into new directions. There's the hearth holder who keeps things safe, keeps the fires burning, maintains some stability. And then there's the agitator who makes things happen and rattles some cages. Yeah? And I think in businesses of the future, we need to see those 4 archetypes being played out in leadership teams. We don't need single heroes. We need different types of leadership working together. And it won't always be easy because sometimes these are in tension. The explorer wants to charge off and forgets about the people. That's where the coach needs to come in. The agitator wants to shake everything up. The hearth holder needs to make sure we're keeping things stable enough. So finally, I conclude with some reflections about having enough. If you only read if you only read 2 things in the book, read the introduction and the epilogue. They're the bits I really care about. The epilogue, I reflect on the fact that we're each born with a little ego inside us that starts off believing that none of us are good enough. And that's actually a little survival function. That function drives us to get the help, the support we need from our family and people around us. And it's too easy to believe that we're not good enough. And that belief can lead us either into despair or it can lead us into huge energy that drives people through their careers. And this is what I see. Now, I don't believe that society or business will change until enough people do some inner work. And that inner work is to discover what does it take to do enough healing and acceptance of who I am to accept that I'm enough right now. I'm enough right now. Because if I can accept that, I can start to work in ways that accept that others are enough right now. I can start to be focused on doing meaningful work and building good relationships and doing what matters. But whilst I'm driven by always wanting more and feeling I'm not good enough, I'm not going to change the system around me. So that's the meaning of the work revolution. It's getting off the endless treadmill of always seeking more and instead living and working in ways in which we can provide enough. Enough water, fresh air, food, meaningful work. I would love you to join in, read the book and apply it in whichever way you can. Thank you.